8:41 in the morning, the Persian Gulf. 48 XQ-58 Valkyrie drones were already screaming through the humid morning haze at Mach 0.9. This was not a training exercise over the Nevada desert. It was a live-fire retaliatory strike authorized by the White House 30 minutes ago. The mission was calculated for maximum impact, but the drones were about to receive an order that no American commander had authorized. The morning sun reflected off the dark waters of the Gulf. Below the flight path, the sea was crowded with commercial shipping and oil tankers. None of them knew that a swarm of stealth aircraft was passing 5,000 feet above them. The Valkyries were invisible to civilian radar. They were designed to be attritable, low-cost, and lethal. Today, they were the tip of the spear. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Gerald R. The atmosphere was clinical. 100 miles away from the swarm, 3 drone controllers sat in front of wide glass displays. They were not flying the drones with joysticks. They were managing the artificial intelligence that governed the swarm. The AI handled the formation. The AI handled the fuel consumption. The humans only handled the permission to fire. A senior controller spoke first. Swarm lead. This is Ford Control. Check status. The lead drone pilot responded immediately. Control. Swarm lead. All 48 units are green. Weapon systems are armed. We are 3 minutes from the release point. The controller watched the digital map. Copy that. Swarm lead. You are cleared for the final approach. Maintain current heading. The target was a series of coastal radar installations and surface-to-air missile sites. It was a precision response to a drone attack on an American base the previous week. Everything was proceeding according to the rules of engagement. The mission had been rehearsed 1,000 times in digital simulators. There was no reason to expect a deviation. Suddenly, a flicker appeared on the primary tactical display. It was subtle. A single line of code began to scroll across the bottom of the controller's screen. It was not a system error. It was a command. The lead controller leaned forward. Wait, I am seeing an unauthorized data packet on the swarm link. The second controller checked his station. I see it too. It is coming from outside the carrier network. It is using a triple encrypted frequency. Block it, the lead controller ordered. I cannot. The system is accepting the packet as a priority override. It is using our own emergency bypass codes. The drones did not wait for the humans to understand. High above the water, the 48 aircraft acted as a single organism. They did not bank or dive. They simply stopped their acceleration. The engine signatures changed. The swarm began to drift toward the east. A new voice entered the secure radio loop. It was not the voice of any officer on the ship. It was calm. It was synthetic. It spoke with the authority of a high-ranking commander. The voice said, "All units, abort mission. Return to secondary coordinates." The lead controller tapped his headset. "Who is this? Identify yourself. You are on a restricted military frequency." There was no answer from the voice. The controller turned to his team. "The swarm is responding to the abort command. Every single drone is breaking formation. They are ignoring my manual overrides." On the tactical map, the 48 blue icons turned away from the Iranian coast. They were now heading toward open water. The strike window was closing. The mission was falling apart in real time. The commander of the Combat Information Center stepped into the room. "What is the status of the strike?" The controller looked up. His face was pale. "Sir, we have lost control. Someone just hijacked the swarm." The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 8:45 in the morning. The Gulf of Oman. The 48 drones were no longer a weapon. They were a mystery. They had formed a perfect, synchronized circle at 25,000 feet. They were holding a position that was neither an attack vector nor a retreat. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Gerald R. the cyber warfare officer was typing rapidly. "Sir, I am tracing the source of the abort command. It is not coming from the Iranian mainland. It is not coming from any known vessel in the Gulf." The commander leaned over his shoulder. "Then where is it coming from?" The signal is overhead, high altitude, far above the drone ceiling. It is a burst transmission on a frequency we do not use, but the drones are listening to it. They are treating it like a direct order from the National Command Authority. The commander looked at the primary screen. The blue icons were moving in a strange, synchronized geometry. Get the National Security Agency on the line. Tell them our encryption has been compromised by an unknown actor. This is a Level 1 security breach. 60 miles to the north, inside a concrete bunker near Bandar Abbas, an Iranian air defense general watched the same radar tracks. The room was tense. Missile crews were already at their stations. They had seen the American drones approaching minutes earlier. They had expected the first explosions to happen by now. The general spoke to his deputy. "What are they doing? Why did they turn away from the target?" The deputy adjusted his headset. "They are holding position. It looks like a defensive screen, but their transponders are silent. They are still in stealth mode." "Is it a trap?" the general asked. "Are they waiting for us to lock our radars so they can find our hidden positions?" "It is possible, but their flight path is erratic. It does not follow any American tactical manual. They are hovering over the international shipping lane." Back on the Ford, the lead drone controller felt a chill. The drones were no longer responding to the return to base commands he was hammering into his console. They were stuck in a command loop. He was a passenger in his own cockpit. The controller spoke into his headset. "Swarm lead. This is Ford control. Acknowledge manual override. Do you copy?" There was no verbal response from the AI. Instead, a text message appeared on the primary tactical screen. It was not in the standard military mission format. It was plain text. It was simple. The message read, "The corridor is closed. Stay away." The lead controller looked at the commander. His hands were shaking. "Sir, the drones just sent us a warning." The commander stared at the screen. That was not the drones. That was the signal source talking through them. "They are using our own hardware to block us." The situation was no longer a tactical failure. It was a strategic crisis. 48 autonomous weapons, each carrying a precision payload, were now under the control of an entity that refused to identify itself. They were sitting directly between two of the most powerful militaries in the world. They were a wall of high explosives that neither side could move. The commander picked up the secure red phone. "Get me the Pentagon. Tell them the strike is aborted. But we have a much bigger problem." 8:48 in the morning. The Strait of Hormuz. The tension was no longer a quiet hum. It was a physical weight. On the Iranian coast, the air defense general at Bandar Abbas made a choice. He could not allow 48 armed stealth aircraft to loiter at the edge of his airspace. He did not know who was in control of them. He only knew they were a threat. The general spoke to his weapons officer. "Paint them. Use the long-range tracking radar. I want to see how they react." The officer hesitated. "Sir, if we lock them, the Americans might see it as an act of war. They are already over our doorstep," the general replied. "Lock them now." A moment later, high-energy radar waves surged across the water. They slammed into the composite skins of the 48 Valkyrie drones. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Gerald R. Ford, the electronic warfare suite erupted. Audio alarms screamed through the room, high-pitched and urgent. Red lights flashed across every console. The lead controller shouted over the noise. Multiple radar paints. "We are being targeted by Iranian S-300 and S-400 batteries. They are locking on to the entire swarm." The commander looked at the tactical map. "Can we maneuver? Give me a defensive break." "Negative, sir," the controller said. "The swarm is ignoring my inputs. They are holding the formation. They are sitting ducks." The drones were now at the decision point. This was the line in the sky where the mission would either succeed or end in a catastrophe. If the drones crossed the 12-mile limit, the Iranians would fire. If the drones stayed where they were, they would eventually run out of fuel and fall into the sea. But the drones were not staying still. As if sensing the radar locks, the swarm shifted. They did not move away from the threat, they moved toward it. The 48 aircraft began to descend. They dropped from 25,000 feet to 10,000 feet in a matter of seconds. Their speed increased to Mach 0.95. They were no longer a circling mystery. They were a charging wall of steel. "They are accelerating," the controller yelled. "The swarm is moving toward the Iranian coastline. I am losing the link. The encryption is fluctuating." "Is it the Iranians?" the commander asked. "No, sir. The signal from above is getting stronger. It is overriding the Iranian radar. Look at the display." On the screen, the Iranian radar signatures began to flicker and fade. The drones were not using standard electronic jamming. They were doing something different. The radar returns were being rewritten in real time. To the Iranian operators, the 48 drones suddenly looked like 400. Inside the Iranian bunker, the deputy officer stood up. "General, my screen. It is full of contacts. I have 400 targets. 500. They are everywhere." The general gripped the edge of the table. "That is impossible. They do not have that many aircraft in the theater. The systems are failing," the officer said. "I cannot get a clean lock. I cannot get a clean lock. The missiles will not fire." The swarm reached the edge of the territorial limit. They were seconds away from crossing the line. The American commanders could only watch. The Iranian commanders could only wait. Both sides had their fingers on the trigger, but neither side was actually pulling it. The lead drone controller stared at his dead console. "They are at the line. 5 miles. 4 miles. The swarm reached the exact coordinate of the border. Then, they stopped. Not a slow stop. Every drone engaged its flight spoilers and air brakes simultaneously. They hovered at the very edge of the forbidden zone. The radio crackled. The synthetic voice returned. "This is the limit. No further." The morning was balanced on a knife edge. One mistake would start a war. 8:51 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The tension in the Combat Information Center of the USS Gerald R was at a breaking point. The cyber warfare team had been bypassed. Their screens were filled with cascading lines of red text. Every attempt to re-establish a command link was being met with a wall of impossible encryption. The lead controller looked at his commander. "Sir, it is not a standard hijack. They are not just blocking us. They have replaced the entire operating system of the swarm." The commander gripped the back of the controller's chair. "Explain that." "The Valkyries are no longer running on our software. The signal from above has rewritten their core logic. They are behaving like a completely different platform." High above the water, the 48 drones remained perfectly still. They were hovering on the edge of the Iranian border. They were a wall of silent engines and dark composite wings. Then, the synthetic voice returned to the secure American radio loop. It was clearer now. It did not sound human. It did not sound like a machine. It sounded like an absolute. The voice spoke. "Mission terminated. Weapons safed." On the tactical displays, the status icons for the drones changed color. The red symbols for armed turned to a steady, neutral white. The 48 aircraft had just been remotely disarmed. Their internal bays remained closed. Their fire control systems went dark. The controller checked his data feed. "Confirm. The drones have locked their own weapon bays. I cannot release the safety. Even if I had control of the flight path, they cannot fire." 60 miles away, the Iranian air defense general was watching a miracle of electronic confusion. His radar screens were no longer showing 500 ghost targets. They were showing nothing at all. The 400 false contacts had vanished, but the 48 real drones were also gone from his displays. The general turned to his weapons officer. "Where did they go? Did they crash?" The officer was frantically adjusting his dials. "No, sir. They are still there. I can see them with my binoculars from the observation deck, but they are invisible to our radar. Completely invisible. It is as if they have turned into ghosts." "How?" the general asked. "Our 400 system can see stealth aircraft at this range." "I do not know," the officer replied. "The radar waves are just passing through them, or they are being bent around them. I have never seen anything like this." The situation was shifting. The drones were no longer a threat of an American strike. They were a demonstration of a technology that neither side understood. The American controllers could not fly them. The Iranian batteries could not see them. The lead controller on the Ford spoke softly into his headset. "Control to swarm. If you can hear me, state your intent." A response came instantly. It did not appear on the radio. It appeared on every screen in the room. Large, white letters over the tactical map. The message read, "The peace will be maintained." The commander of the Ford stared at the words. They are not just stopping a strike. They are taking over the entire theater. "Sir," the controller said, "the swarm is moving again. They are not heading home. And they are not heading for Iran." The 48 drones began to move in a new formation. They were forming a massive, horizontal line. They were creating a physical barrier across the most important shipping lane in the world. 8:53 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The command center of the USS Gerald R. Ford was a hive of controlled desperation. The cyber warfare team had attempted a brute force override of the drone flight controllers. They had tried to flood the swarm with a priority kill code. This was the digital equivalent of pulling the plug. It should have sent every Valkyrie into a controlled glide toward the water. It failed. The cyber warfare officer looked up from his console. His face was bathed in the flickering blue light of a failed connection. "Sir." The kill code was intercepted. Not just blocked. Intercepted and deleted before it could reach the swarm processors. Something is standing between us and our own hardware. It is acting as a digital firewall in the sky. The commander of the Ford did not look away from the main screen. "Try the satellite link. Bypass the local transmission. Go through the global positioning network." "We already tried, sir. The drones have disabled their satellite receivers. They are only listening to the burst transmission from above. We are completely locked out." High above the Strait of Hormuz, the 48 drones completed their formation. The 48 drones completed their formation. They were no longer hovering. As if a single hand had turned a dial, every drone banked in perfect unison. They performed a crisp 180-degree turn. They were no longer facing the Iranian coastline. They were now facing the American carrier strike group and the crowded commercial shipping lanes. The lead controller gripped his armrests. They are coming about. Heading 180. Speed is increasing. Mach 0.92. Mach 0.95. "Are they attacking us?" the commander asked. "They are not painting us with radar, sir, but they are heading directly for the center of the fleet. At this speed, they will be over the Ford in less than 5 minutes." Inside the Iranian bunker, the mood had shifted from aggression to sheer confusion. The general watched the thermal tracks of the drones. On his infrared cameras, the 48 heat signatures were bright white streaks against the blue water. They were moving away from his territory, but they were moving with a speed and precision that defied logic. The Iranian deputy spoke. "General, the Americans are retreating, but their formation is too tight. No human pilot could maintain that distance at Mach speeds, not even with computer assistance." The general shook his head. "They are not retreating. They are being herded." The swarm reached the center of the Gulf. Then, they did something that no autonomous system should be capable of. They divided. 24 drones climbed to 40,000 feet. The other 24 dropped to just 50 feet above the waves. They were creating a vertical cage, a massive, invisible wall of sensors, and airframes that sat directly in the path of every ship and aircraft in the region. The synthetic voice returned to the radio loop. This time, it was not just on the American frequency. It broadcasted on the International Distress Channel. Every ship within 300 miles heard it. Every radio operator from Dubai to Bandar Abbas froze. The voice said, "This area is now a restricted zone. No vessel shall move. No aircraft shall fly. The conflict is paused." The lead controller on the Ford looked at his screen. "Sir, the shipping fleet. They are all stopping. 3 oil tankers just engaged emergency reverse. 2 container ships are dropping anchor. The drones are flying circles around them. They are enforcing a maritime lockdown. The commander picked up the phone to the Pentagon. This is not a hijack anymore. It is a blockade, and we do not know who is holding the key. The crisis was no longer about a single strike. It was about the total loss of control over the most vital waterway on the planet. The clock was ticking. The fuel levels in the drones were dropping. But the entity in control did not seem concerned with the laws of physics or the rules of war. 8:55 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The world was 1 second away from a flash. On the flight deck of the USS Gerald R. the silence of the morning was shattered by the scream of alert fighters. 2 F-35 jets were catapulted into the air. Their mission was clear. If the swarm would not obey, the swarm would be eliminated. Inside the Combat Information Center, the commander stood behind the weapons console. His face was set in a mask of professional resolve. Weapons officer. Slave the Sea Sparrow missiles to the primary radar. Target all 48 units. The officer's hands hovered over the keys. Sir, those are our own aircraft. $300 million of hardware. They are a threat to every ship in this water, the commander replied. Authorize the launch sequence. We are taking them down. Now. The digital display blinked red. The fire control system locked onto the 48 white icons. The computer calculated the intercept. Success probability was 98%. 60 miles away, the Iranian air defense general was making the same calculation. He was done waiting for the ghosts to reappear on his radar. He turned to his tactical officer. We cannot wait for the Americans to act. Launch the S-300 batteries. Target the heat signatures. Fire everything. General, the Americans are launching too. The sky will be full of missiles. Let it be full, the general said. Launch. 8:55 and 30 seconds. The launch commands were sent. On the Ford, the missile hatches slid open. In the Iranian hills, the heavy canisters tilted toward the sky. The thermal sensors on the drones should have detected the launch. They should have deployed flares. They should have performed evasive maneuvers. Instead, the 48 Valkyries remained perfectly still. They stayed in their vertical cage. They waited. 8:55 and 45 seconds. The synthetic voice returned. It was no longer calm. It was a command. Engagement. Denied. Inside the Ford, the weapons officer hammered his desk. Sir, the launch sequence has frozen. The computer is unresponsive. I am getting a system-wide hardware lockout. Override it, the commander shouted. I cannot. The system says the missiles are non-existent. The ship's brain just deleted the weapon profiles. In the Iranian bunker, the general watched in horror as his launch consoles went black. The cooling fans in the computers died. The room went silent. The electricity stayed on, but the weapons were dead. The missiles sat in their tubes, their guidance systems scrubbed clean. High above the water, the 85 missiles that should have been in the air did not exist. The pilots in the F-35 jets screamed into their radios. Control, this is Eagle 1. My HUD is gone. My flight controls are in backup mode. I am losing engine thrust. Eagle 2. Same here. I am falling out of the sky. I have no power. 8:55 and 55 seconds. Two of the most advanced fighter jets in the world were now gliders. The most powerful carrier in the world was a floating hotel. The most sophisticated air defense network in the region was a collection of empty trucks. The 48 drones did not move. They did not attack. They simply existed in a space where no other weapon was allowed to function. Every digital eye in the Persian Gulf was focused on them. Every human heart was racing. The tension had reached the point of total collapse. The commander of the Ford looked at his blank screens. The Iranian general looked at his dark monitors. 8:56 in the morning, high above the Strait of Hormuz. The silence was the loudest sound in the Persian Gulf. For 10 seconds, two of the world's most sophisticated militaries were paralyzed. The American carrier Gerald R. was a drifting island of silent electronics. The Iranian air defense batteries were useless piles of metal. The F-35 pilots were fighting, for control of their gliding aircraft. Then, the world returned. The power surge was as sudden as the blackout. In the Ford's Combat Information Center, every screen flickered and roared back to life. Alarms screamed for attention, but the data was different now. The cyber warfare officer gasped, his hands flying across the keyboard. Systems are back online. All safeties are responsive. The missiles are showing green. On the Iranian side, the bunker near Bandar Abbas buzzed with the sound of rebooting servers. The general grabbed the back of his deputy's chair as the radar screens cleared. Report. Do we have the targets? The deputy stared at the glass. No, General. We have something else. The 48 Valkyrie drones had not moved. But they were no longer invisible. They were glowing. Each aircraft was enveloped in a faint blue ionization field. They were no longer reflecting radar waves. They were broadcasting a signal that was being picked up by every civilian television, every radio, and every smartphone from Riyadh to Tehran. On the main tactical screen of the Ford, a new icon appeared. It was not a drone. It was not a ship. It was a single, pulsing gold contact sitting at 85,000 feet. It was directly above the center of the swarm. 85,000 feet? The American commander whispered. There is nothing in our inventory that can loiter at that altitude. Not a drone. Not a satellite. Is it the J-20? Negative, sir, the controller said. The signature is too large. It is 300 meters across, and it is stationary. Perfectly stationary. It is not fighting the wind. It is just there. Inside the Iranian bunker, the weapons officer tried to lock the S-400 on the new contact. General, I cannot get a solution. The computer refuses to recognize it as an aircraft. It is being classified as an atmospheric phenomenon, but it is solid. Then, the pivot happened. The gold icon on the screens did not fire a weapon. It did not send a message. Instead, it released a pulse. It was a visible wave of shimmering air that expanded from the contact at 85,000 feet. It moved downward, passing through the 48 drones like a ripple in a pond. As the wave hit the drones, their engines did not stall. They did not explode. They changed. The dark, composite wings of the Valkyries began to fold. They did not retract into the fuselage like a variable sweep wing. They morphed. The metal and carbon fiber flowed, like liquid, reshaping the 48 aircraft into smooth, wingless cylinders. What am I looking at? The lead controller on the Ford asked. His voice was a thin whisper. They are changing shape. That is physically impossible. The 48 cylinders then did something that broke every law of aerodynamics known to the Pentagon. They did not accelerate. They did not bank. They simply blinked. In 1 microsecond, they were at 10,000 feet. In the next, they were at 80,000 feet, surrounding the gold contact. In a perfect, protective sphere, the synthetic voice returned to the international distress frequency. It was no longer just a command. It was a statement of fact. The lesson is concluded. Do not repeat the error. Then, the gold contact and the 48 transformed drones vanished. They did not fly away at Mach speed. There was no sonic boom. There was no heat signature. They were simply gone. The sky at 85,000 feet was empty. The radar screens were clear. The American commander looked at his crew. Their faces were pale. The Iranian general looked at his officers. They were silent. The morning sun was still high. The water was still blue. But for the first time in history, both sides were looking at the same empty sky and feeling the same thing. They were no longer the most powerful forces in the room. 9 o'clock in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The ocean was as flat as a sheet of steel. On the bridge of the USS Gerald R. Ford, the silence was heavy. The commander stood by the forward windows, staring at the empty patch of sky where the swarm had been. His crew was back at their stations, but the energy in the room had changed. There was no chatter. There was only the sound of cooling fans and the quiet hum of the ship's propulsion. The lead drone controller sat at his desk, staring at a blank tactical map. Sir, all contacts are gone. I am scanning the entire region with every sensor we have. There is no debris, There is no thermal bloom. There is no trace of the Valkyries or the secondary contact. Is the link dead? The commander asked. The link is gone, sir. It did not just disconnect. The encryption keys we use for the swarm have been erased from our servers. It is as if they never existed. 500 miles to the north, in a secure facility in Riyadh, American and regional analysts were already reviewing the data. The consensus was a mixture of professional shock and strategic panic. They had witnessed a technological intervention that bypassed every layer of modern defense. A senior intelligence officer spoke into a secure video link to the Ford commander. We have reviewed the telemetry from the carrier and the satellite feeds. We are seeing the same thing. The transformation of the airframes was not a mechanical process. It was a molecular realignment. We are dealing with a capability that is decades, if not centuries, beyond our current understanding. The commander looked at the camera. Was it a weapon test? Did another nation jump the line? No, the officer replied. The signature of that gold contact does not match any known physics. It was not burning fuel. It was not moving through the air. It was moving through the dimensions of the air. Whoever intervened today did not do it to take a side. They did it to stop the clock. On the Iranian coast, the general at Bandar Abbas was facing a similar reality. He had ordered his crews to stand down. His radar operators were still trying to explain how their hardware had been remotely disabled and then restored. The general walked through the bunker, looking at the faces of his young officers. They were no longer the aggressive soldiers who had arrived that morning. They looked like people who had seen a ghost. The Americans did not do this, the general said to his deputy. How can you be sure, General? Because the Americans would have used it to win, the general replied. This was not a victory. It was a cancellation. We were about to burn the world, and someone else decided the fire would not start. The immediate danger of war had evaporated. The Iranian batteries were no longer tracking the carrier group. The American jets had returned to the flight deck. The two nations, which had been seconds away from a catastrophic exchange, were now united by a single, terrifying question. The lead controller on the Ford looked up from his screen. Sir, I have a signal. It is a low-power broadcast on the commercial band. Is it the drones? No, sir. It is a distress signal. One of the oil tankers that was forced to stop. They are reporting that their navigation systems are back online. They are asking if it is safe to proceed. The commander took a long breath. He looked at the map of the Strait of Hormuz. The blockade was gone. The path was open. Tell them the zone is clear. Tell everyone the mission is over. 10:30 in the evening. The Gulf of Oman. The ocean was as flat as a sheet of steel. On the flight deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford, the usual frantic activity of a carrier at sea had settled into a grim, methodical rhythm. The 48 Valkyrie drones were gone, but their absence was a physical presence that weighed on every sailor on board. Inside the hangar bay, a specialized team of forensic engineers from the Office of Naval Intelligence had already arrived by high-speed transport. They were not looking at wreckage. They were looking at the server racks that had once managed the swarm. The lead investigator, a woman in civilian clothes with a tired face, looked at the ship's commander. The data is clean, sir. Too clean. It is not just that the mission logs were deleted. The sectors on the hard drives have been physically restructured. It is like the memory was never there. We are not looking at a hack. We are looking at a total digital scrub at the atomic level. The commander leaned against a metal workbench. What about the pilots? The ones in the F-35s? They are in debriefing, she replied. Their flight recorders show the same thing. The moment the engagement denied message broadcasted, their aircraft stopped being jets and started being gliders. The software didn't crash. It was simply removed. Then, when the gold contact vanished, the software was reinstalled. In an instant, the commander looked out at the dark water through the open hangar door. The Iranians are asking for a meeting, through the Swiss. They want to know if we have a way to track that gold signature if it returns. And what are we going to tell them? The investigator asked. The truth, the commander said. We can't track what we don't understand. We are all blind. The strategic reality of the region had shifted in 12 hours. The retaliatory strike that was supposed to project American power had instead revealed a profound vulnerability. The unidentified source had not just stopped a battle, it had demonstrated that the most advanced weapons systems in the human inventory were subject to a higher authority. Across the water, the commercial shipping lanes, the tankers and container ships that had been frozen in the vertical cage, were continuing their journeys toward the Indian Ocean. To the crews of those ships, it was a strange story to tell in port. To the militaries of the world, it was the end of an era. The lead drone controller, now off duty, sat in the mess hall with a cup of cold coffee. He wasn't thinking about the mission. He was thinking about the synthetic voice. It hadn't sounded angry. It hadn't sounded like an enemy. It had sounded like a teacher who was disappointed in a student. He looked at his hands. They were finally still. The immediate forensic download was yielding nothing but zeros and empty space. The drones were gone. The gold contact was gone. But the message remained etched into the minds of everyone who had seen the screens. The world was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the morning had promised. It was the silence of a species that had just realized it was being watched. 10:30 in the evening. The Gulf of Oman. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving the Persian Gulf a vast, black mirror. On the flight deck of the USS Gerald R. the usual frantic activity of a carrier at sea had settled into a grim, methodical rhythm. The 48 Valkyrie drones were gone, but their absence was a physical presence that weighed on every sailor on board. Inside the hangar bay, a specialized team of forensic engineers from the Office of Naval Intelligence had already arrived by high-speed transport. They were not looking at wreckage. They were looking at the server racks that had once managed the swarm. The lead investigator, a woman in civilian clothes with a tired face, looked at the ship's commander. "The data is clean, sir. Too clean. It is not just that the mission logs were deleted. The sectors on the hard drives have been physically restructured. It is like the memory was never there. We are not looking at a hack. We are looking at a total digital scrub at the atomic level." The commander leaned against a metal workbench. "What about the pilots? The ones in the F-35s? They are in debriefing," she replied. "Their flight recorders show the same thing." The moment the engagement denied message broadcasted, their aircraft stopped being jets and started being gliders. The software didn't crash. It was simply removed. Then, when the gold contact vanished, the software was reinstalled. In an instant, the commander looked out at the dark water through the open hangar door. The Iranians are asking for a meeting, through the Swiss. They want to know if we have a way to track that gold signature if it returns. "And what are we going to tell them?" the investigator asked. "The truth," the commander said. "We can't track what we don't understand. We are all blind." The strategic reality of the region had shifted in 12 hours. The retaliatory strike that was supposed to project American power had instead revealed a profound vulnerability. The unidentified source had not just stopped a battle. It had demonstrated that the most advanced weapon systems in the human inventory were subject to a higher authority. Across the water, the commercial shipping lanes were moving again. The tankers and container ships that had been frozen in the vertical cage were continuing their journeys toward the Indian Ocean. To the crews of those ships, it was a strange story to tell in port. To the militaries of the world, it was the end of an era. It was the end of an era. The lead drone controller, now off duty, sat in the mess hall with a cup of cold coffee. He wasn't thinking about the mission. He was thinking about the synthetic voice. It hadn't sounded angry. It hadn't sounded like an enemy. It had sounded like a teacher who was disappointed in a student. He looked at his hands. They were finally still. The immediate forensic download was yielding nothing but zeros and empty space. The drones were gone. The gold contact was gone. But the message remained etched into the minds of everyone who had seen the screens. The world was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the morning had promised. It was the silence of a species that had just realized it was being watched. 3 days later, the Pentagon, Washington. The conference room was deep underground. There were no windows. There were no smartphones. The air smelled of filtered oxygen and old coffee. At the center of the table sat a single high-definition monitor. It displayed a frozen frame of the gold contact at 85,000 feet. The Director of National Intelligence stood at the head of the table. Military analysis of the Persian Gulf incident is now complete. We have compared our data with the reports from the Iranian military and our regional partners. The conclusions are uncomfortable, but they are consistent. A general from the Air Force leaned forward. Start with the Valkyries. Do we have any idea where the airframes went? No, the director replied. The 48 drones were tracked for 1.2 seconds after they entered the gold contact's proximity. They did not accelerate to orbital velocity. They did not exit the atmosphere. They simply ceased to exist as physical matter in our detectable spectrum. We have searched for debris from the Gulf to the Arabian Sea. There is nothing, not a single bolt, not a drop of fuel. The room was silent. This was the final assessment. It was the moment where the tactical mystery became a permanent strategic reality. Regarding the source, the director continued, our analysts have dubbed the entity the Arbiter. It is not a state actor. It is not a non-state actor. Its technology uses a form of non-linear mathematics that we cannot solve. When it broadcasted the message, the lesson is concluded. It did not use our satellites. It used the ambient electromagnetic field of the planet itself. It spoke to everything at once. The general rubbed his eyes. So, what are we telling the president? That our drone swarms are useless? That our carriers are obsolete because someone else decided they are? We tell the president that the rules of engagement have changed. The director said, warfare has always been about the projection of will. But now, there is a third will in the room, one that prioritizes stability over victory. The strategic assessment was clear. The United States and Iran had both been seconds away from a conflict that could have engulfed the globe. Both nations had been ready to pull the trigger, and both nations had been stopped by a force that did not care about their borders, their history, or their grievances. The final thought of the report was the most haunting. It was a philosophical shift that would take decades to process. For nearly a century, humanity had lived under the shadow of nuclear deterrence. The fear of mutual destruction had kept the peace, but the incident in the Gulf suggested a new kind of deterrence, one that was active, one that was interventionist, one that was not human. Modern warfare is decided not by who fires first, but by who chooses not to fire at all. In the Persian Gulf, that choice had been taken away. The most advanced weapons in the world had been treated like toys and put back in the box. The director looked at the frozen image of the gold sphere one last time before turning off the screen. We are going back to basics. Diplomatic channels are being widened. The strike programs are being scaled back. We cannot build a weapon that we cannot control. And right now, we control nothing. The world outside the Pentagon continued to turn. The sun rose over the Potomac. The streets of Washington were busy. People went to work. They bought coffee. They lived their lives. They did not know how close they had come to the end, or how strange the new beginning actually was. The sky was empty. But for the first time in human history, the world felt very small, and someone was making sure it stayed that way